Hello and welcome back to Factorio. My name is Nasty. In today's episode, we are continuing on with the production science competition, and I'm going to be doing a deep dive into electric furnaces. So one of the things that I wanted to explore before we even get into the individual designs is I wanted to have a dedicated video to talk about miners by themselves. I did a deep dive this last week into miners, and I was trying to understand how the core mechanics of them work. The next episode, or the next video, I guess. I don't know if I can call my videos episodes. They're almost like movies usually, so I'm trying to make more consumable content, so this is one of those. So what I'm going to be doing today is I'm just going to focus on the miners and what their actual UPS costs are and where they're used. So specifically, the reason that I want to get into this is I'm trying to understand like if these are better for direct inserting into furnaces. In what case is that actually going to be better, and why exactly is it better? So some of the concepts that I'm really curious about here, and I'll just grab this real quick, is that I'd like to explore is the following kind of core staple concepts. So we have a mining drill that's by itself by default, and what I'd like to do is at different mining productivity levels, I want to test what happens if I have productivity modules placed inside of them, speed modules like this, and let's say having efficiency modules. And we'll just break it down to just these three types. And you can see here kind of drastically just how fast this is actually producing items. So if I go and let's go and have some belts routing here. And let's have this come down. And then I'll grab a wonderful little testing utility and then we'll run those. So they're all outputting the same amount, but you can see that kind of their animation time that these are running not so often and they're constantly cycling, and you can even see by turning on the wake list that this is constantly running, this one's running slower. There's different rates at which these are running, right? So this is running at 2,000 per second and this one's running at 801 per second because of the slowdown that it has in productivity modules. And then the next question that I would have is finally, what happens if I wind up putting quality modules in here? Now this has nothing to do with the competition, but still it's an interesting question. What happens when you start having these mixed quality outputs? And you'll wind up seeing that, it still is fully stacking those items. So the question is kind of like, how is that even possible, right? So how is it always doing that and always outputting the items that are in here? So the question that I would have is like, of these three, do any of these make a difference for UPS at all in terms of like their update time? So that's what we're going to explore in today's video. So stick around for that. Now this is a rather extreme example of what you can do with a single mining drill. Now, spoiler alert, don't do this. This is terrible for UPS, but if you wanted to, you can get here and about 9 lanes here of, am I counting this even correct here? 11 lanes of stone that we are pulling out of one big mining drill. And this can produce 45,000 per second. And this is not even running all the time. This is running very occasionally, right? So that means that 11 times 240, we're pulling out 2,640 items per second out of this one individual mining drill. And that's still nowhere near saturating what it can do. Now, granted, this is at mining productivity level 8,000. That's what I have used for most of my baseline benchmarks because that's what I had when I first started doing it. Getting into when I started doing a lot more strict benchmarking was about 8,000 in my mining productivity in my actual mega base. I'm now up to about 16,000, but just in terms of this being practical for people that are really getting into mega basing, a lot of people in my Discord have this high of mining productivity, and some people have even pushed way beyond that to like 32,000, for example. So it's a very achievable thing when you have a very high research speed. So it's something that can and will happen. So my question was kind of like, okay, so if I start varying the productivity bonus that we have, and adding speed and speed beacons and all these different things, like what happens to the actual miner? So to make it really simple, the way that I have this whole entire setup working is I have this following scenario that I've created. So this is a rather extreme example. You're not going to need, 8.8 thousand mining drills producing this, but 4,400 lanes of stone is a lot. But the point is more just to give a very strict test. So you can see here the game is paused when this is actually loaded, so the benchmark is going to be set. mining productivity is varied. In this case, it's set to 2000. 2001 is 1 over, so we are currently at mining productivity 2000. We could research 2001. So at this rate, when we start this up, you can see that this has 502 items per second, or about on one lane, we can have 120 items per second that can get carried across. So this is about 5 times as much. So the next scenario where I created this was I said, okay, let me just start increasing it. So let's go ahead and step it up to 8,000, which is what it is in my current base, or was for a period of time. So now what I wound up starting to notice was when I started running this is that we would have kind of a little bit of a weird production graph. So I started seeing these kind of like these little picks that started to happen at this point. And then this got way more extreme as we got up to the actual speed that is in my current megabase. So once we got up to 15,000 and started running it, started seeing that the graph, the production graph here, started to have this almost discrete step function that started to get created. And if you want to see a really extreme example, the moment that you go up to speed modules, so for example, if I created this setup in my exact current base, this is what this would look like. And I'll bring up the entity update time so that you can see it in real time with me as I run this. We're going to run it, and we have a huge entity update spike, and then back down to 3, and then huge spike at 6, now down to 3, huge spike to 6. This is very laggy. I can feel this as my mouse barely can move when this happens. So what's going on is you're seeing these huge spikes in production, even in the 5-second window. And if you look at this, it looks on average that you're mining 48 million and 72 million. What's really happening is in one tick, we're mining 84 million stone and then nothing, 84 million and then nothing. And if you continue to bump this up, you see this huge spike in entity update time. So I was like, okay, that's really interesting. Let me go and look at that and understand what's going on. Now, that was an interesting thing for me. The next one that I wanted to look into as well was quality. So I wound up adding quality as well to these because I was just curious what happens as you increase everything, like the number of quality modules. So in this particular scenario, the way that I've done this is I've created efficiency modules if there's nothing in it. Pollution's turned off, so it doesn't matter, but I just want to include the slots in there anyway, just to have something, make it easier for the upgrade planner when I'm creating these. But there's 2 different scenarios that I want to compare. So quality modules on themselves, because that reduces the speed. So in theory here, the concept that I'm trying to explore is like, what is going on that's causing that large entity update spike? And does quality impact it? Does the speed impact it? What is going to be the reason why, like, where is the entity update time coming from? So quality was one concept, and I wound up having 1 quality module, 2, 3, and then 4. So that's the other one that I have. And then finally, the only other one that I did is I capped everything at mining productivity 4,000. And I wound up then saying, well, let me go and add a productivity module to it as well, so that I can wind up actually seeing if the speed bonus is the main reason for it. Now, for simplicity's sake, the reason I'm using a productivity module 1 is because it has the same penalty as a quality module does. So the legendary ones here. So the speed here is the same -5% impact. So what I'd like to compare is one that has just productivity modules and quality modules. So let's go ahead and go look at the results, and I can go and explain a little bit about what was going on there. So as always, this is available on my GitHub page. You can go and look at this. This will be in the video description below if you want to go and refer to this in the future. But as I covered, those are all the different test scenarios that I wound up creating. Now, the very first thing that I wanted to look at, and we'll talk about this is the baseline kind of concept that exists. So at mining productivity 2000, you get to start seeing these kind of like small spikes that happen. And so what's kind of happening here is you wind up seeing that there's a spike and then there's nothing. Now this is what basically, if you look at this here, we're going to have at mining productivity 2000, the base speed of the actual mining drill is 2.5 per second that they can craft. So 2.5 times 20,000 over 100, that's 502 items per second. I showed that a second ago. That means every 8 or so ticks, we're going to have to mine something. That's like, it's an 8.375 is what it can actually produce per tick, sorry. So in one tick, it'll mine either 8 or 9 items depending on its current productivity progress. Now, productivity progress bar, that is over here. That is this concept. That is going to be here whenever this is running. And let's go and put this back to normal. you're going to see this little productivity bar that's going up and going down. So you can see how it's kind of not always in line here, and that's because it's either crafting 8 or 9 items per tick that it's actually going to do. So if we go back to the results again, what's going on then is that if you look at this here, you can actually see that pattern kind of emerge. So you wind up seeing here's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then it does something. And then it will do this again. Here's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3. Now, why is it 4? Why is it in periods of 4 and why is it not in periods of 8 ticks? Well, because when you're unloading items to a belt, when you're unloading those items onto a belt, what you wind up having is that, right, a belt has a throughput of 60 items per second stacked to 4. That means 100 or 240 items per second. Now per lane, that's 120. So 120 items per second divided by the 60 ticks that are in every second. That means there's 2 items per second that we're unloading from the big mining drill, any individual tick. Now, if we go back to the graph, you're going to wind up seeing then over here that the amount that's going out is, if we know we're getting either 8 or 9 ticks, that we're going to go and craft something to drop those items out. That means that there's going to be 2 items dropped here, 4 items, 6 items, 8 items, and then we remine again for 2. So that actually is fully running this pattern. Now what's interesting is the moment you step this up to mining productivity 4000, now it's every 16 or so ticks, so 16 or 17 that it's going to be able to craft per tick. So now instead of it happening every 4, now it's happening every 8. So that means that now that since we've effectively doubled-ish, with some rounding error, the speed of the mining drill, now this entity update time spike is happening less often. However, the amplitude has now doubled. Now we're over 15 milliseconds, whereas before on average we were around the 7.5, 10 or so. Now this actually continues as a pattern once we go up to 8,000. And go beyond that to 16 or 32,000, now you're seeing that the frequency that it's happening is less often. But then when we go even higher to 16 and 32,000 mining prod, now the entity spikes are off the chart. So if you look at these two here, and I'll look at the 8,000, the 4,000 example and 8,000, you're seeing that now these are lined up perfectly because we started everything at the same tick. You're seeing that now it's skipping this middle one, is going to this next one here. So it's cutting out this extra one because we've doubled effectively the speed of the actual mining drill. So where this is now getting to is, my point is, if you look at this is 15 milliseconds of update time. Now we've gone to 30 milliseconds of update time. So you basically, if you take this entity update time spike and stacked it on top of itself, you'd get this graph. So the only explanation where that would even possibly make sense is that it is pre-computing in 1 tick all the items that it needs. So that means that every single mining drill is going to make 33 items in 1 tick. So then over here, this is going to be making 16 items in that tick. And then 64 items once you get up to mining productivity 32,000 and so forth, right? So that means that mining drills are throughput based. Literally every single item that's crafted has to be then calculated by the game. So you can't actually optimize miners. Now we can prove that too here. So I wound up actually hooking up a profiler to the game so that I could understand what is going on. So now that I know how to do that, so I found this might be a little bit helpful. If you're looking at this, so you see these big spikes here followed by a whole bunch of nothingness. So keep that in mind. So just real quick, what this is doing is you see that 25% of the time it is calling a function called mining drill perform mining. And then it's doing a clear storage buffer. Well, that's an interesting concept. Mining drills don't have slots, right? So why is it calling clear storage buffer? So this explains a little bit more what the mining drill is doing. So the mining drill actually it's actually a chest on the inside. And what it's doing is, for 1 tick, you can see here, it's doing this perform mining, where it actually goes and mines and creates the actual raw items. And that makes sense because it's 25% of the CPU time, but it only has 143 samples. Now, when it's clearing the storage buffer, that's 14% of the CPU time, but it has 1,240 samples, so 10 times the amount. So That's this little entity update time average. It's just unloading items to a belt. So that means that this must be, and this is going to be a little bit more in the weeds, but if for the programmers out there, that means that this is happening in O of n time. So every single item that's getting crafted is O of n. So that means that it's going to loop through every single craft instantly in one tick and doesn't short circuit it. So it is actually computing every single one deterministically. So that means it's also updating all of the statistics and the graphs, and everything's happening in one tick. So you have a very large spike that happens from the mining drills as you go up and up and up in speed. So to prove this all out, if you look at this graph here, until you get to quality modules, which is actually going to throw this into a wrench into this thing, you can see that pretty much the entity update time is almost exactly identical. Now, the higher the speeds means that I'm not, like for this particular sample that I got, sometimes I'd miss this spike. So for some of them, that's where the graphs are a little bit off. But where I'm saying is like, so let's say I just make that simple. Let's say I sampled from here all the way to this tick and I missed this big spike, then that would actually have either a higher entity update time or lower entity update time, depending on how long I sampled for. I didn't want to run it for hours and hours and hours on end, so I just picked a fixed time period to actually sample it. But you wind up seeing is that on average, all of those line up. So that means that that's again proving that like, yeah, when the mining drill is doing something, it's doing it fully instantaneously in one specific tick. And then on average, it's the same. So that makes sense too, because if we look up here, the average update time, if you just stacked these on top of each other, should be the same. It's just now happening less frequently, but for higher amplitude. So but the average, if you just took the sum of the area under the curve, that should be the same. So that's an interesting part. Now, quality changes things. So let's dive into what's going on with quality. So to keep this simple and so that we can compare everything, I have here a chart that is comparing everything with those productivity modules where I said where it's productivity tier 1, that they had that same minus 5% bonus. And you wind up seeing that like, okay, was it the speed that impacts things? No, not really. This is like 0.05% down to the worst case here of a 0.1% delta between if you weren't impacting and putting quality in there. But the moment that we added quality is where we started to see the entity update time start to go up. So, but you can see that once you add one module and then you add 2 modules, 3 modules, 4 modules, there's diminishing entity update time that kind of comes up. So it's almost like a logarithmic function that happens. Whereas this is all constant, this is logarithmic. So with that being said, I was going like, okay, well, why is that happening? So as we saw up here, there's this function called clear storage buffer. So it makes me think that the actual mining drill has a big chest. So it turns out it actually does. So what happens is when you're actually running the quality modules, you wind up seeing that it runs roll quality, but roll quality is actually a really small amount. So it's only 1.1% of the CPU update time compared to the actual core mining, which was like in the 28 percentile, or 28% of the time was actually doing it. In this case, even 30%, where it's actually doing the mining. So it's a very small amount. So the actual computing quality is small, the RNG side of things. However, it started to call a lot more swap width, which I thought was kind of an interesting thing. And so that made me think that like what's going on is if it's calling swap width a lot, that means that the mining drill must actually be a chest. And the mining drill actually probably is storing multiple levels of quality internally inside of it. Now, the flow statistics was another thing that increased over time as well. So what you wind up seeing, just to demonstrate this, and I'll show it in Factorio actually to give an example here in a second. But what you wind up seeing here is, again, just locking everything at mining productivity 4000. You wind up seeing that when you have no modules and just using efficiency modules, you have this kind of very normal kind of mining drill as you tick-tock between the 8 or 9 items that they wind up actually going and crafting. So, but then when you get up to here, and then you go and add one prod module, okay, it's about the same. There's no real difference, and I'll make this a little bit smaller so we can compare the two here. So they're about the same. There's no real difference. They look exactly the same kind of like the kind of like wave functions going on here. But now when we add one quality module, okay, hold on. Why are there all these small little entity update time ticks? And then once we add 4 quality modules, well, now we have smaller, but even more tiny little update times that are happening all over the place here. So now we've broken up this function, so something must be going on. So the only thing that I can assume is there's an item swap that's happening. Now, just to prove the point, speed modules, huge entity update time spike. Okay, let's go back to Factorio. So what that means to me, and let me go and load up one of the quality modules for this so that we can talk through that. So if I have, let's just, one quality module is fine. So that means to me is that when this is running, now there's a very small chance that it's going to produce anything extra, right? So when you're looking at this, right? So if you think about that, what's probably happening every single tick is this. You have, let's say we'll use the chest as an example. Let's go ahead and just grab some stones so that I can kind of explain what's going on. What I think is happening is like most of the time you're going to have, and we'll put this in here just so I have a lot of them. So let's say I put here, let's put some of these in here. Let's put some uncommon in there. Let's put some rare, some epics and legendaries. Cool. But I think is most of the time it's going to have always in here regular stone. And then occasionally it'll wind up having a couple uncommons like this, and it'll start stacking up until it has 4, and then it can unload this. But it will continue to prefer the item that's in the first slot until it drains, then it will unload this one, and then it'll perform mining again. So I think that's what's actually going on behind the scenes, is that this is now swapping internally the inventory, because this is actually a chest. It's not, there is an internal buffer that's held, but you just can't see it. There's no way to see it. You can't have a debug menu that can show it. There's no way to know what's actually going on internally. But that makes sense given the graphs we've seen, and also what I think is going on with quality rules. So it's going to hold for a while, like a couple of these, until it can finally fully output a stack of 4 at least, and you're always going to see that there's 4 here of those quality modules that are in there. Sometimes 8, sometimes 4, just depending on if they happen to line up. So because it's always outputting an item of 4, well, you're not always going to get that amount, so it has to hold it for a period until it can actually unload it onto the belt here. So it's actually using the internal, there's some internal hidden inventory. Now, as you add more quality modules in here, right? Now your chances of you rolling that is going to be much higher, right? So now you're going to have more chances of getting that same quality item that's going to come out of there. So you're going to see that there's more of the time that we're having uncommon. So that means that this kind of explains what I was showing a second ago here, where we wind up having kind of this like diminishing return that happens. Let me scroll down to, where do I have it? I'm apologize for that. You wind up seeing this kind of like it's reaching some like maximum here. So it's not a linear curve, it's a logarithmic curve, and even more explanation here. And that makes sense too if you think about what's going on, is that, you know, this is now going to add here a 6.25% increased chance that you're going to get uncommon. This is now going to be 12.5. This is until we get up to 24.8% with rounding, right? That you're actually going to get when you get up here. So because of that is increasing up to 25% chance, that means you're more and more often going to get an other type of quality that comes out of the drill. So the inventory swapping is just going to be about the same, how often it's actually swapping the inventory internally. And that makes sense too when we look at this graph here and you wind up seeing that there are these tiny minor ticks that are happening, these extra update times. And the only thing I can think about is that it's going to be adding an extra, it's going to be swapping internally its inventory to deal with that. And so you see at higher quality, it's happening more often, these smaller update time spikes that are happening. But you still have the same perform mining, but now with the caveat of having these smaller update time spikes as it swaps inventory. So that all being said, what that means to me is you can't actually optimize miners at all. There's not much we can do from with circuits or anything to handle the update time, because it's what it's doing is it's always going to perform that mining in one tick, and you can't short circuit it, you can't get around it. And also quality impacts it more than I actually thought, which is kind of an unfortunate thing, but it's a real thing. So there's technically, I will say, you can, if you're wondering just how big of an internal buffer can this go to, you know, like if you look at this, is it a legendary chest? Is it a regular steel chest? Like how big can this go? Well, we did some testing, and it turns out that the maximum size of the internal buffer is actually 2 to the 16th power, and minus 1. So 65,535 lots. That's as big as a legendary, or sorry, a fully maxed out space platform. What was I going to say? The actual hub. Why can't I find the hub? There's the car landing pad. So if you wound up putting all in completely maxing this out, with the large inventory that can be in here, that's up to 65,535. That's actually how many slots can technically fit inside a big mining drill. There is a way that you can abuse this so that you can actually go and completely fill it, which I will definitely not be showing in a video because I don't want people to break any kind of multiplayer stuff. So with that being said, it's an interesting mechanic. There is definitely, without a doubt, a inventory that is an internal hidden inventory that exists in here, and that's how they account for the higher productivity that exists. Now, what can you do with this information now that you know it? Well, the only thing that we can do with mining drills, when you think about going into a furnace, because that's going to be the most normal use case for this, the only thing that you can do, because this is constantly unloading external inventory, is you can clock it for one specific case. The only thing that you could potentially benefit from is reducing here. We'll look at this as an example. We can't bypass this when this happens. What we can do is we can bypass these small little internal updates. So we could have it all unload its internal inventory in one tick, and we could save a lot of these smaller ticks here. So that's one thing we could do, is we could clock the individual miner. And the only way that you can actually clock it and take advantage from it is, in this case that I'm demonstrating here, is where we insert it directly into the electric furnace. If you're going onto a belt, clocking this does nothing, because that means you're going to have uneven output here. So this is your bottleneck. So you're going to have the unloading costs all the time. So the only optimization you can make is with direct insertion. So that's my overview on miners. This is probably a lot more information than you're probably going to ever need about them, but it just is the way that they work. And hopefully this is helpful, because this was helpful for me to understand them. So in conclusion, what that means is that mining drills are, entity time is directly proportional to throughput. So the more that you mine, the more your entity update time is going to happen. The only thing you can do is just directly insert it into a furnace, and that's the best you can do with the actual throughput. So the second thing that you can do is, just so that you're aware, is that quality is going to add additional few smaller entity update time spikes. So that's just something to be aware of, looking at me with the way that I void materials. So that's something that I can't bypass, and that's just something that exists. So something to be aware of as well. Now, then again, just mining directly into a chest, mining directly into the actual item means that you can bypass some of these smaller scans when it's updating, but that also means that you're going to have more frequent of these larger spikes. So really, it's all throughput based. There's not much you can really do in terms of actually going and improving the performance. So again, like I said, the only thing you can do is just reduce the number of steps that it takes and transfers from the actual miner to the individual item that's going to actually consume it. So as another example, if you wind up having, let's say that you're doing this with a foundry that is going to be smelting things, your best case, and you should always be doing this, is just directly mining into the actual foundry when you're on novice and you're crafting this kind of wonderful stuff. So you can just instantly do this. This is going to be your best case scenario that you can do this with. Now, the last thing that I'll leave you with as well is something to be aware of, is that at very high mining productivity, your big mining drills are going to be much faster than your small ones. So if you wind up experiencing lag, and this is such an edge case where this can even be a case, it doesn't matter again for average, but electric mining drills are slower. So by nature, they're going to be more averaged out and be kind of a smoother UPS for you. So that's something to be aware of. Now, at like absurd levels of mining productivity, you might even want to consider using a burner mining drill. Same thing applies there, but I don't think that the trade-off of using a burning mining drill is worth it, other than the tile spacing that you wind up. So all that being said, that's my deep dive on miners, and in the next episode, we're going to dive a little bit further into the actual production of these wonderful electric furnaces. So stay tuned, subscribe for that if you're interested in seeing that content. As always, thank you so much for watching. This research is provided to you by me and other people in my Discord server, so go and join if you're interested in it. And then, as always, all this information is also available on my GitHub so that you can refer to it in the future. Anyway, thank you very much for watching. That was my deep dive on miners. Have a great day.